Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Is AI the Final Battle for Privacy? My name is Mirza Salegic. I am a head of product marketing at Comforte, and as always, it's great to see so many of you joining us again today. A lot of organizations are currently exploring the benefits of AI for their business, trying to increase productivity, provide better service and products and so on. However, as personal and sensitive data gets mixed into these systems, it's also sparking big concerns about data privacy and security. With AI advancing so quickly, it's of course important to understand its impact on privacy and data security. So today we'll discuss how AI and data privacy intersect and discuss strategies to keep sensitive information safe in this very fast-moving space. And as always, we have a couple of amazing panelists joining us today who are experts in different areas and will share some latest trends and best practices that can help all of us stay ahead. So it's my pleasure to welcome Enza Yiannopoulou. Enza is a principal analyst on the security and risk team at Forrester Research and a certified information privacy professional. Enza helps organizations worldwide embed privacy and ethics in their strategic initiatives. Hi, Enza. Great to have you with us today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi. We have Jesse Sedler. Jesse is VP of Products at OneTouch.io, helping organizations to increase data visibility by discovering, classifying, and gaining insights from data. He works with a variety of clients, so he can share from his learnings and experiences so far with AI. And with Jesse, as you might see, we have another guest. It's her first webinar, so she's a bit shy, and of course we are taking care of privacy here. So I will not say any name, but welcome both of you. Great you are joining as well.
Thank you, appreciate it. And yeah, I figured it'd be good to expose her early to her future and some of the challenges that we're discussing these days. Never too young.
Exactly. And last but not least, we have Felix Rosbach. Felix is head of product management at Comforte, driving the product strategy for our data security platform. He's a security expert focusing on data-centric security and privacy-preserving protection technology. Welcome, Felix.
Hi.
Hi. So we are going to talk about a couple of things: current state of the adoption, objectives, challenges, and also share some best practices. We will also have some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions during this webinar, please post them in the chat and we will cover them at the end of the session. So let's kick it off. And I'd like to start with you, Enza. When speaking about AI and privacy, could you provide a brief overview of what you currently see on the market? What are the key objectives of AI initiatives? What are the most common applications organizations are starting with, and where are they currently on the AI adoption journey?
Thank you for the question, and because I figured data can be very helpful to answer this very specific question, I have with me a few data charts that I would like to use, so to give everybody an overview of where we are with AI and generative AI adoption. So these questions ask where organizations are in terms of implementing AI and generative AI tools for business application. I have highlighted, if you click one more time, high priority and critical priority. We are around 62% there, so 62% of organizations are implementing or really prioritizing the implementation of AI and generative AI tools for business application. The next slide that I have prepared goes a little bit more into investment, because if you want to know where people are, you might want to follow the money, as we say, and this question is specifically referring to change in investment for 2025. And you see here, I looked at generative AI, but also looked up the predictive AI, so the more traditional AI that many organizations are still using, and will continue to use, because as you can see there, the investment is going to increase next year. very similarly for AI and generative AI. So the companies are taking an approach which is, yes, generative AI, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of hype around generative AI, but they haven't forgotten there are a lot of stuff can still be done very well with more traditional AI. And so, as you can see, the level of investments there is pretty much staying comparable between the two types of technology. And in 2025, we're going to see more, of course, of the investments in both areas. The next slide that I have, the next data point that I wanted to share with you, have to do with how far are we in terms of maturity. We know companies are prioritizing AI and generative AI. We know they continue to invest next year, but where are they today? And click one more time, please, and you're going to see I highlighted that the deployment of multiple use cases at enterprise scale, so more mature approaches of generative AI, only 15%. So there is still a lot to go there. You can see there from the data, a lot of organizations have, there are some that are still trying to do research and pilots, but really a lot of organizations also are in the phase of initial production. And just a few are starting with the development of use cases at departmental scale, as the data shows. But really, the point here is a lot of hype. Investment will continue and will grow. But when it comes to maturity, we are just scratching the surface. Only 15% having these large developments at the moment. The next one that I have goes into some of the detail, Mirza, that you were asking me in terms of the which models, what is that is making their way into organizations. And if you click one more time, you will see I highlighted the first three options there for us to think about. A lot of organizations are leveraging commercial foundational LLMs that are offered by vendor. You can see their pre-trained commercial model. Again, image, speech, and video is another option there for customers that are really 50%. I would say 47% on the pre-trained and slightly more on the commercial foundational models. Of course, the respondents could pick all the different models they are using, so that they could give us multiple answers, as you can clearly see from the data. But I think it's very clear at the moment it's all about, it's coming from the vendors. We are using those commercial foundational models just for text, or we can have the option of speech and video also becoming very popular. And then we are leveraging capabilities that are embedded in technology coming from products. And this is one that I think we will see more and more of. We know that vendors of very different types of services and technologies are all embedding, or most of them are embedding generative AI inside the products. And this is the way generative AI is definitely also making their way in organizations' environments. One more, please, just to complete my overview where we are in terms of the adoption of generative AI. Why do we do it? You said, why are we going for that chatbot or for that generative AI empowered HR platform? Employee productivity remains one of the main benefits that the organizations, I would say, are hoping to have with generative AI, especially. Customer experience, innovation, operation as well, a lot of IT operation. That is an area where we start to see really some good progress and some very positive results when it comes to generative AI. And then the other use cases. And I think I have one more where probably I've just made a summary of, my next slide makes a summary of some of the use cases. And please build it all at once. And just to give you more ideas of employee experience and productivity, collaboration is another one. And then customer experience, another one where we see a lot of use cases. One where we start to have these, if you talk to organization, they would say, we are trying internally, and then we are going to move to customer facing activities. And with the customer experience, more and more is going to be external. Marketing is advertising. And then if you continue to click, there is operations and software development and software where definitely we see a lot of adoption. So this really was an overview of what we are seeing in terms of generative AI and AI adoption, investment, and use cases.
Great, thank you. I mean, this was very interesting. So to summarize, like 62%, if I remember correctly, are prioritizing AI investments are increasing. Most of them in initial stage right now. Very few really deployed in multiple use cases. We see mix of Gen AI and traditional AI. And the most common use cases are, increasing productivity, improving customer experience, innovation, improving operations, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Great, thank you. And when you take a look at this as a privacy expert, what would you say are the main concerns for organizations looking to, leverage AI for their business?
It's not a surprise when we ask the classic question, what are the barriers to AI or generative AI adoption? Trust is definitely up there together with data privacy and data security. There is very clear question, how do we secure the data? How do we make sure that we comply with all the relevant requirements that are still applicable? I mean, GDPR didn't go away and all the privacy regulation around the world didn't go away. So I would say in general, there is a real challenge, which is at the very first step. Do you know which data are you feeding into the system? That is our very first starting point. You need to understand which data you are feeding to the systems, and then from there, you may want to say, this is corporate data, this is internal data, and this is personal data, this is sensitive data. And so we start from there. Understand the data that you are feeding to the system. Remember, it might be using data for fine-tuning a model, it might be data for prompting a model, but also there is the output. There is a very interesting amendment to the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, that says that if an AI system is able to output personal data, the system should be considered personal data. So, there is the element of the output. We need to be very careful on what is this system presenting, and we know that there are accurate or inaccurate personal data that have come out of generative AI system, and we have to be able to tackle all of that, and it is challenging. And then one more thing that I'm going to say, the privacy requirements, the privacy principles that we know, minimization, purpose limitation, those are still applicable, those are still valid. And I always say, if you look at any framework for trustworthy AI, responsible AI, privacy is a critical component of whatever framework you want to pick, whatever new regulation you want to pick. And that means that those critical privacy principles have still to apply. In this context, we need to make sure that we understand how to make them make sense in this context. And then I would say if I think about requirements specifically, how do you continue to comply with privacy regulation, consent, data subject rights? I think those are two examples that explain how, as privacy professionals, we have to be clear. We have to comply. These requirements are still valid, and we need to find ways in which this still makes sense. The right to be forgotten, the right to fix data. So if I know that an organization has data that is inaccurate, until today, I could go and say, hey, you have to update my data. There is a data quality requirements in the GDPR. Doing that with an LLM is incredibly difficult. Actually, it's impossible. So if the LLM is producing inaccurate data about me, saying maybe that I have been in places I've never been, or I have said things that I've never said, today there isn't a way to actually fix that, as it's very difficult to forget someone in those systems. And so we have to be very, very careful when we decide to feed personal sensitive data into the systems, because it's complicated from a privacy perspective. And I think that is really the overview of the issues that I think my peers are thinking about.
Okay, cool. So when companies think about implementing some measures to comply with those, data protection, privacy regulations, is there any kind of difference between how to protect the data for AI implementations that are, traditional AI that you mentioned, or, publicly available AI? And do you see some kind of differences in how they perceive privacy challenge in that sense?
Well, there is no question that the introduction of the kind of generative AI has brought up a number of issues, but I would say generally the use of LLMs, and there are some LLMs that are not necessarily feeding a generative AI application, that are bringing up a lot of questions because the way they were trained, because consent was in there, because how are we gonna then add, our own customer data if we want to do that, or employee data on top of what the model has already done. So I would say, again, and I repeat that the understanding of the data that you are feeding into an AI system, generative AI system, is very important. Again, the reference there, if you want to think about regulation, is an easy one, is the European AI Act that just was adopted formally in July. And the reference to privacy is there everywhere. And so understand the data. And then one of the, I think one of the guidance that most often we have seen so far is privacy preserving technology, masking, the identification technology that can really help allow an organization to move on with their projects by removing some of the most sensitive data that probably is not necessarily always needed, we might think. And so de-anonymizing data, the identifying data through a pseudonymization of data, masking, those kind of things are definitely very, very helpful. And then we will experiment more. There is this big promise around synthetic data, being able to provide us with large volumes of data that can have the same characteristics of real data, but simply doesn't belong to any specific individual. So I think there is a lot of expectation there, but for that approach, we are not ready yet. So the recommendation in these cases is make sure you are going back to your basics, strengthen the foundation of privacy and security, all the good lessons we have learned so far. If you're doing Gen AI, if you're doing AI, just go back to those. And to be fair, the clients that I work with that are the most mature from a kind of generative AI adoption perspective, very often they tell me, we made sure that these safeguards were in place. We made sure that what we know from privacy and security and data governance, I would say, is in place. And if we have that foundation, we can layer on some of the tools and the controls as we move on and understand more on the risks. But make sure you have all those foundations in place and use a technology that we know has worked for analytics, will give a hand also for some of these new use cases and new technologies.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Enza. Thanks for sharing the insights. Now, Jesse, Enza just mentioned like importance of understanding the data. So in order to protect the privacy, first thing that we need to do is to identify what sensitive information is in the first place. So you, as I mentioned before, work with a lot of companies implementing data discovery and classification. So what is so special about AI?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, that was great. And seeing the charts and the data, I think also helps quantify at least, where the world is in this journey. In terms of AI in general, even segmenting it a little bit, like traditional AI, right, or predictive AI, ML, as Enza had in the slides, right, you're looking at a lot of columns in some type of structured data source. So the whole notion of rule making around that is a bit simpler because there's just a limited pool of individuals who have access to it, as well as like it's confined to a individual single place or single set of data sources or warehouses, whatever it might be, right? What we're seeing a lot more of from our customers and our field engagements is with Gen AI, right? Because now it's everything is in scope. Any type of data, unstructured data has typically been much more ignored, I would say, because the challenge is so much bigger and potentially so much more challenging than securing, understanding, conceptualizing, putting controls around structured data. That is becoming the Wild West. And so we're seeing, time and time again, by an order of magnitude, just the interest in how do you understand what unstructured data you have? How do you put that label on it that says, hey, it's secret, it's top secret, it's internal use only, it has PII, and doing all of that with the nuances of kind of the modern enterprise, where yes, credit card numbers are sensitive, but what about customer numbers? What about employee ID numbers? What about a lot of more customized data that is sensitive to somebody and not sensitive to somebody else? Then you get into a world of interpretation on top of, well, what is sensitive, right? Those are some really hard questions that lawyers, I'm sure, grapple with all the time. So all of that to be said, that the challenges of AI and different types of AI have really just dramatically changed the game from a security, governance, privacy perspective, because like we're all making valuable data day in and day out, right? I download a CSV and I send it to 4 of my colleagues who email it to 3 other people. I made a lot of copies of really sensitive stuff that has value, but how do you kind of put your controls and governance in place around it? So yeah, it's actually all quite fascinating to see just the shift from very structured thinking and structured data to unstructured. How do you wrap your head around it and control it?
Yeah, thank you. Felix, like looking like now from discovery perspective to protection. Like when I know, okay, this might be like I have identified what is sensitive. So from data protection perspective, what makes AI special when it comes to protecting sensitive information?
Absolutely. I think first of all, Enza and Jesse gave a really good overview about the complexity plus also the speed of adoption, which from a protection and cybersecurity perspective gives a completely different challenge, right? I just had a very interesting conversation with a cybersecurity leader about the AI topic. And basically the conclusion was we had a skill and talent shortage in cybersecurity and privacy. We also have a skill and talent shortage in AI and understanding AI and building it. And now you bring those two together, that brings up a very interesting situation of having a double problem, basically. And that is, yeah, in essence, what we are facing also when it comes to the protection. If you think about a CISO and the security team and the governance team dealing with an enterprise environment, and now you have that AI topic that is really hard to understand. I mean, we are not talking about I understand how ChatGPT works and the prompts and stuff, but if you want to embed privacy, and Enza explained that quite well, if you want to think about privacy, you need to understand what happens with tokenization in the model. What is pre-training a model? How does RAG work? How does the kind of whole vectorization of data works and stuff like that? And this is so complicated and so complex that from a security perspective, a whole new domain is opened. So that is one challenge. And then I would say kind of there's 2 different kind of bigger use cases that Enza also showed, one of which is I'm using an existing application model that is out there, something like ChatGPT, some as a service vendor who has AI capabilities, versus I'm building my own internal application or even customer-facing application. And those bring different challenges also from a privacy perspective. For one, you don't have control over the model. You don't have control over the kind of inference that is there, right? So the only thing you can do is give a policy to your employees and say, if you use ChatGPT, I want you to use it. I want you to speed up, but please don't share any confidential information, which is enforcing wise very, we all know how those policies work out there, yeah. So, and then on the other end, if you build your own application, if you build your own cool product with it, a completely different set of challenges comes in. What data do you use for training? We heard that, right? How do you protect that data? How do you sanitize that data? How do you build the stack? What tools do you daisy chain to get a cool kind of application running that really helps the customer? Just read that Klarna is basically embedding AI quite heavily and actually bringing it to their customers, making customer support and customer service much more AI based. Those applications are completely different level in terms of complication and data privacy and data protection, and having the right policies and the right approach and the right strategy in place there is absolutely necessary. But on the other end, and I totally agree with Enza, we are still at the beginning of understanding what technologies to put in place and what technologies to use to achieve X and Y and Z. So very complicated, in my opinion, and very challenging environment right now. But there is a couple of ways, and that's also kind of doubling what Enza said, how you can attack that problem right now with the technology available to make sure you are on the safe side, on the safer side, if we want to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So there is obviously an opportunity. There are some risks, there are concerns, some challenges. It's very complex, like you said. But let's try now to talk a little bit about, are there any best practices or recommendations from your side? So, Enza, in your opinion, and from what you see on the market right now, do you have any kind of best practices for organizations to share, who want to leverage AI while also at the same time, of course, preserving privacy?
Yes, there are, from my privacy perspective, just to follow up quickly on what we heard there around the, the model. I think there is a lot of, if we thought that third-party risk management was something that, was important before, I think the whole conversation here is also showing that's another part of the program that we need to start taking care of, which is really understanding the model. And if I cannot understand the model, at least I need to gather all the right information from the providers of the model, which opens up a complete different set of best practices and things that we have to do. But if we think specifically on privacy, I said the discovery and classification of data. I love Justice and said, unstructured data, it's a complete different story. And I argue just generative AI brought back some of those unsolved challenges that we had before. It's always been very complex to manage unstructured data, but I love to tell my customer all the time, if you don't have good practices, hygiene, best practices, or your unstructured data, you won't deliver the competitive advantage that generative AI can deliver. You can do what the standard thing that everybody else can do, but it's really the power is in that data. The quality and how you're protecting it are two critical components. So definitely give priority to your unstructured data sources. When it really comes to understand it, classify it, and then determine access. We had a conversation yesterday with a couple of CISO that were really challenged at the idea of policy that do not deliver too much. And what about if we were to really try and understand access a little bit better, really to kind of move to the next level? As I mentioned, I believe it's important to start also think about risk assessments slightly different, because the risks tend to be different. There is a lot of bias discrimination on top of the classic privacy risks that we are used to think about. So update those risk assessment, starting from data protection impact assessment is a good place, but you need to make sure as an organization that you are embedding and changing those assessments to embed the new risks that come from the specific use of AI and generative AI into your environments. We talked about the, the anonymization, the mask tokenization, all the technology is there and is useful. But there are two things more from a process perspective. The very first one is, I know that it's challenging when you think about AI or generative AI to think about purpose, but it is still important. Start from the use case, but try and understand ahead. What is the benefit that I'm trying to achieve? What is the use case that I'm working within? What is this technology there to deliver? And I know this is very, very complicated. Today, I meet with a lot of organizations and say, we are asked to use generative AI. We don't know how, we don't know for what reason, but we want to use it. There is a lot of this FOMO, the fears of missing out. But start from the use case. If you're defining the use case, you are able to also think about purpose, and think about purpose is going to lead into data minimization and limitation of the data that you are going to use. And it's still needed, because otherwise you end up throwing at a model maybe a lot of sensitive personal data. You create huge liabilities for your organization, and actually in terms of benefit doesn't deliver anything. So think about the business purpose of doing that. Think about data minimization as much as you can, and make sure that you are using both from a selection of the data you want to use and the technology to really ensure that you are using data that is what you need for that specific project. So I think right at the top of my mind, these are some of the key recommendations at this point in time and best practices. I don't know, Jesse, Felix, what do you think?
I think it's so important that you, as you said, understand the landscape, understand the privacy, and that's kind of usually a challenge, because those fast forward-thinking teams in enterprises embedding AI and using AI and building those products don't necessarily have a connection to the privacy and governance teams. So ensuring that connection, ensuring that those teams work together, and you do not, as you kind of described correctly, create a lot of liability, because creating those applications, fine training the models and stuff is so complex. You end up in a situation where if you have to retrain it, or if you have to rethink the whole architecture because of privacy, you waste a lot of money and resources. So very early on, think about that. I think that's an absolute valid point to make here.
Yeah, and I'll add, I love the point on data minimization because it's just good hygiene, right? It's good data hygiene to have retention policies that after something hits its useful life or its policy, you get rid of it or you put it in cold storage and back it up. And of course, big organizations are not doing these things, right? It's very much so like eat healthy all the time, right? It's just, we know it's the right thing to do. And most of the time we're not doing it until there's an existential threat that says, yeah, okay, you really have to go do it. Go to the doctor, they say eat healthy because so-and-so is going to happen to you pretty soon, probably going to eat healthier, right? So in this case, the fact that, you know, that threat is coming because these companies are finding themselves in trouble, right? Or they're missing opportunity to unlock value of that data because of the sprawl that they're up against and because they're sitting on a bunch of old, you know, rot data they don't need anymore. Now, I think for a lot of them, and what that is definitely a theme we see more and more in market of teams wanting to grasp what do we have, how old is it, where do I have duplicates, what can I get rid of? Not even mentioning the storage costs associated with it, where there's now a cost savings on top of the benefit you get from understanding your data. I think it's spot on, and it's definitely become more of a trend that we're seeing around minimization exercises and retention exercises. Again, it's just good hygiene, so it's a good thing that folks are starting to do it now.
Jesse, like, do you have anything specific to discovery and classification that you would like to share in that sense as well?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big use cases that it's always been a use case, but it's probably kind of come much more in your face in the past couple of months, is just this notion of where do I have production data in non-prod environments? Because non-prod environments is where I'm going to do my training, or my data teams are going to be playing and using data in various forms. And so the question is now becoming, you know, very much to Felix's point on the data protection side, where can I use data? Where can I anonymize or protect the data in such a way that it keeps its referential integrity, but it's no longer some kind of PII? And so we have a number of engagements ongoing around, all right, we're finding, you know, production data in non-prod environments. That's bad, right? That's kind of point one of you have some kind of sprawl issue in pipelines you have no idea about. But then number two becomes, well, can you also go find my tokenized data or my anonymized data to verify to to an auditor or regulator that I do have controls in place? So we're getting it on both sides. And a lot of the driving factor behind it is, hey, people want to unlock the value of what they're sitting on, because the data at pick big insurance, big finance, big retail, right? That data and that story becomes an extra 2% top line growth year to year compared to a competitor who is 5 years behind it. So I think to Enza's point, and just kind of overall, this discussion is changing from more of a security, how do I lock stuff up, to how do I turn data into an asset that is monetizable and valuable that I can use even for the use cases talked about, either internal productivity, marketing, targeting, attribution modeling, whatever else it might be that gives you an additional boost. Now in economics, global economics are strange these days. If you can derive more value from what you have in your basement, in your data center, in your cloud stores, now's a good time to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So basically what the data analytics teams are trying to do for a couple of years now AI is accelerating that a lot, right?
Big time.
Yeah, Felix, like from sensitive data, how can sensitive data be protected in a way that is still usable by AI applications?
Yeah. I think kind of the best answer to that is almost a summary of what we have said, because the protection is so dependent on the steps before. So really understanding the privacy landscape, understanding your data landscape. So Enza, Jesse, right? So making sure that you have that visibility and can make good decisions. And then kind of making sure that you reduce the amount of data that is being kind of exposed in those environments to an absolute minimum. I think that's always a good and best practice, whatever regulation you're dealing with. If it is PCI and you're embedding or you're ingesting any type of transactional data, if it is PII data and you have to comply to GDPR, that's always the best practice, making sure that you use the right tools in that regard. We heard about more fancy privacy preserving technologies that are on the way. We have heard about the classic masking, for example. So there's a couple of tools available already right now where you can sanitize the data. Do not forget to sanitize the prompts. I think that's a usual topic that we've seen out there. Yeah, so the ingestion and the vectorization is thought of, but not the prompt, and the user is putting in weird stuff. Users do that from time to time. Yeah, and then there's also the aspect of, yeah, if you are building an application internally for your customers that is using large language models, that is using generative AI, for example, for customer service, and you have the need to go back to the clear text, or you need to have the need to connect to a database for real customer data. For example, customers asking, what is my bank account last 5 transactions, and you need to show that and present that. Those use cases are critically important and very, very carefully handled, because they bring a lot of risk of exposing data to the wrong person, of ingesting data in a way that you don't want. So in those cases, really important to build the whole application, the whole stack, with privacy and with data security in mind. I think that's the key point.
Cool, thank you.
Can I quickly add one thing that we didn't say? And so it was a lot of technology, of course, and processes. There is this thing called training and literacy that I think has to go along. I'm starting to see now that if organizations are making large investment in generative AI, they are trying to combine a significant investment also in the training of their people. And I think this is important. In Europe, there is a lot of reliance, both from privacy, then from the EU AI Act on the kind of, you want to call it human in the loop, but the human supervision at times when it's needed. It's important that organization can automate as much as they can with the controls, but also understand there are times where you want someone to look at this, and we need to create the skills. And I think it's important. Yesterday, Ms. Tangwanden said that their entire legal team is going through retraining to try and understand what's the problems with generative AI, how do the privacy or legal aspects change. And I think it's important that we consider also this aspect. So I think it's fair to take that into account, as well as all the technical protections that we discussed.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. So let's use, like, I think we have like a couple of minutes left, so let's share some final thoughts before we start the Q&A. I already see there is at least one question coming in. So can you give us some outlook into the future? What do you expect going forward? Will AI really be the final battle for privacy? Maybe each of you with your thoughts that you would like to share with the audience.
I'll answer this well. Are you familiar with the mythical phoenix? The phoenix is this mythical bird that somehow sets itself on fire and then rises again from its own ashes. The phoenix is also associated with the eternal city of Rome, the idea of immortality and renewal. And this is privacy, right? We've been there many times, the metaverse and our generative AI and the internet, and every time it's like, oh, privacy, forget it. But it is so crucial. And I think we are going to see more and more of it. It's going to become more complex. It's going to become much more technical than we have seen in the past in many ways. And I also, and that will make me very unpopular, there will be a time where the regulators will start asking companies about those liabilities that we have discussed. And so I think 2025 will see that shift. Regulators, started to inquire on organizations using AI and generative AI, not just the providers, but the organizations, about what are your controls, what are your processes. And so I think we need to start getting ready for that.
Thank you. Felix, Jesse, who wants to go next?
I'm happy to go. So I still like the term of like, is this the final frontier? And I agree with Enza. I think that there's always going to be kind of the next thing and the next area that privacy gets more and more embedded in and more interested in. Completely agree too that regulators are going to start. I mean, the rush to where we are today over the last 2 years of ChatGPT has probably caused a lot of pause and a lot of people to be educated very quickly, and then to take a step back and then like redo some of the education to really understand the nuances of what we're talking about, which is incredibly complicated. Lots of PhDs are going into this space, right? So you need to have pretty deep understanding in order to make a rule, right, around how you should be using these things that are very, very complicated. So I think that we will definitely see more of an uptick in regulator questioning, right? More news stories about so-and-so got fined because of misuse. And the other side of it too is I imagine we'll see more on the insurance front, right? Of companies needing their corporate liabilities, where this also plays a pretty significant role. And that in and of itself will also push to hopefully more privacy preserving techniques, right? And privacy as a forefront in thought, and how big entities think about how do we unlock data in a privacy preserving way. Yes, they should do it because it's the right thing to do. Doesn't always work that way. So they should do it because the regulator says so, and also their insurance providers are saying so, right? Getting it from both angles to make it more of a commercial decision of how they can use these things responsibly. So all in all, again, I think we're at the start, as everyone said, it's the start of this journey. It's going to be a very long journey, like the internet journey from 20-something years ago. We're still dealing with how do we ensure privacy on the internet? Still a pretty big problem. So never going away, but it's nonetheless a very fascinating space to be a part of. So thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. And from my perspective, we hear a lot of buzz, we hear a lot of opinions out there. I mean, there's even people saying that AI will not be around in a couple of years, right? So there's a lot of different opinions in my feed, at least on LinkedIn. So I have to say, I believe in AI. I think it will have a place in our society and will change things drastically. From a privacy perspective, I do believe that we will even see more challenges. So sometimes we now talk about, okay, I added my name, or my name was in the training data, or my address was there, or whatever. I think what becomes much more fascinating from a privacy perspective is the metadata. And especially if we look at the Apple Intelligence, for example, or some of the first ideas and products around watching you while you do your daily business, your daily job, and then helping you on, everything you are doing by giving you suggestions. That metadata that is collected gives a very good impression of who you are as a person, what you think, what you believe, how you react on stuff. And now AI gives us the ability to use it and to make something with it, where a human wouldn't be able to do something with all the touch points. And from a privacy perspective, I think this is a level we've never seen before. And that gives also challenges in terms of how we handle it and how we deal with it. And I think that will be very interesting in the next 2 to 5 years.
Cool, great, thank you all. So let's open up now the Q&A. As I mentioned, I already see one question here coming in. The implementation of AI in Africa is a big challenge. How can you do the implementation in Africa? Anybody, anything to share in that sense?
I'm not an expert on Africa, I would admit. I think it really depends on what are the specific challenges. These are more performance computing challenges, it's a problem of data related, infrastructure. So I think that probably it deserves a little bit more of a discussion about what are the specific challenges. Because, arguably you can say, these models might be available to any organization wherever they are. So I don't think it's an issue of availability. I suspect it's an issue of infrastructure. And I think that would require a conversation that goes well beyond the privacy aspects. But if there are any specific elements, maybe we can discuss, but it's a very general question, difficult to.
It's too broad, yeah. But thank you, I think that's Felix? Go ahead.
Yeah, from my perspective, what we see and we are active in Africa is it's a huge area, right? And various different countries, some have privacy regulations in place. If we think about it from a privacy perspective, and are very advanced in that regard. Others, are lagging with privacy, and for those individuals, it might be living in those countries, it might be a challenge coming up, because if a country doesn't regulate on the privacy of these tools and techniques, they might train and use the data in ways that you don't want. Another aspect that I might raise here for a second is the ethical training of data, and the whole kind of training topic, where we see also in developing countries people being used to train image generative AIs and have to classify those images and are exposed with images that are, they shouldn't see and they shouldn't have. And we are then using those AIs. And it's also an aspect that is I think, mention worthy. And at some point, yeah, we need to think about, or we now need to think about how we deal with that and regulate that as well. That's something I'm really concerned about.
Just a quick point to add to is that, you know, maybe not specific to Africa, but anywhere where you're thinking about implementing AI or BI or analytics or any of the above types of using your data, having a sound foundation in terms of some of the topics we've talked about of, you know, discover, classify, label, protect, tokenize, mask, having those things in place before you start the projects, right? Seems like a very responsible way of thinking through, again, using, unlocking in an ethical manner, in a responsible manner, and a privacy preserving manner, right? So that before you jump to using, you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, cool. So we are a little bit over time, but we have really questions coming in, so I would like to extend it a little bit. Hopefully that's fine for everybody. So one more question, like what strategies do you envision for bridging the gap between technological advancements and robust ethical guidelines in this field? Anybody wants to take this one?
I tell you one thing that has more to do with policy, which is I think we have to create the right incentive for the fields of ethical AI ethics in general. I think there are very strong economic drivers today in the advancement of technology and why companies are investing that. And the investments and companies are making heavy investments in advancing the technology. We need, and I think policymakers might take forever to provide incentive in those fields that I'm thinking from academia all the way to organization. But unfortunately, also we have to say that in the last few years, we have seen on one side advancement in investments, and on the other side, some of their ethics team being sent home. And this is something that we cannot, as a society, I think we cannot do that. And I think so investment incentives, making ethics that fundamental in the way you approach generative AI is really the first step to close that gap.
Okay, great.
Too, just kind of a somewhat personalized point. Like I remember back learning how to use a computer in school when I was when I was 8 or 9, right? And there was certain rules you learned about when first getting on a computer, right? An iMac in 1990 something, and that the hope at least is that as kids grow up these days, that is part of the education, right? It's not right just using the tools; it's using them in the right, responsible way. That you don't need a regulator to tell you as a kid how to do things the right way, but it should be inherent in society and the ways that we think about data usage, PII, what's sensitive, proper hygiene on the internet, proper hygiene when running analytics. The earlier that those things can be infused into the education systems globally, I think the better off everyone will be, because it becomes then second nature of, am I doing something good or bad, right? And it becomes part of just the moral compass of society overall.
Yeah, cool. So like a driver's license for AI, right?
Love it.
All right, cool. Then thank you very much, everyone. Enza, Jesse, Felix, it was really a pleasure to talk with you. I've learned a lot from our discussion. I would like to say special thanks also to our audience. I hope you found the session helpful, gained some valuable insights for your AI journey. If we didn't have enough time to answer some of the questions that were coming in, we can do it via email. I think as we explore, obviously, the super exciting possibilities of AI, we should always remember the importance of privacy and data protection, because building those solutions that are not only cool and innovative, but also responsible and secure will be key to shaping a future that we can all trust, right? So keep exploring, stay curious, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much and take care. Bye-bye.